Alright guys, in the last video I mentioned that there are 3 steps to make use of the dependency injection framework and implement services in Angular 2. The first step is to create the service, the second step is to register the service with Angular's built-in injector, and finally we list the service as a dependency where it is required. So let's start with the very first step, which is creating the service. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and within the app folder I'm going to create a new file, employee.service.ts, and this is the naming convention for a service. Now if you remember, I mentioned that a service is nothing but a class with a specific purpose. So we are going to create a class called employee service, and we need to export this class so that we can import it elsewhere. Now this service basically has one job: to provide data to the component that asks for it. So we are going to have a method called getEmployees, and it is just going to return an array of employees. So let's go back to employee list component and just move this hard-coded data into the service. So over here it is going to return an array of service. Now let's go back to our employee list component and make sure that employees is initialized with an empty array. Let's save that and head over back to employee service. Now as a good programming practice, it is recommended that any time you create a service, you decorate it with injectable. So we are going to add a decorator called injectable with the parentheses, and we have the red squiggly because we need to import it. So let's import injectable, and this we are going to find it in Angular/core. Now I'm going to talk about this injectable decorator in a separate video, but for now just remember that any time you create a service, you need to include injectable decorator. Alright, so now we are done with our very first step. We have created a service that returns employee data. But for Angular, this is just going to be any other class. So we need to register this with Angular's injector so that it knows about it. So for our second step, we head back to our app.component.ts, and here we are going to add new metadata called providers. So underneath template, I'm going to say providers, and this is going to be an array, and employee service is what we are going to mention, and we have the red squiggly because we need to import the employee service. So import employee service, and where do we have employee service? We have it in the current folder, employee.service.ts. Now we don't have to include the TS, of course. So basically what we are saying is that, hey Angular's injector, I have this employee service, I'm going to register this with you, provide it to anyone who asks for it. So this is how you register a service. And the place where you register a service is really important because the injection is hierarchical. So let's understand that for a moment. Now we have our app component, and we have our employee list component and employee detail component. Now we have registered at the app component. So if you register with the app component, the employee service is available to the app component and all of its children. So the employee list component gets the employee service, and so does employee detail component. And if employee list component gets it, so does its children. So it's hierarchical. So another example, let's say we have app module and we have employee component and a customer component. Now we have 2 services, employee service and a customer service. Now we know that the employee service is going to be used only for employee components and its children. So in such a scenario, what is recommended is that you register employee service at this employee component level so that all of its children get access to it as well. I don't need this employee service in the customer components. And the similar thing with customer service. So if you have a customer service, register it at the root component for customer level, and that is going to be available to all its children. But there are also services, something like HTTP, which you would need in every component in your application. So that is going to be registered at the module level. So if I register HTTP at the app module level, I can get access to it in employee component as well as customer component and all of its children. So the place where you register your services is going to be really, really important. Keep that in mind. All right, now let's get back to our code. All right, so where were we? Right, so we have completed our first two steps. We have created the service and we have registered the service. The final step is to declare the service. And if you remember from our last videos, the dependency is going to be in the constructor of the particular component. So I'm going to go to employee list component, and over here I'm going to have the constructor, and within the constructor I'm going to use TypeScript shorthand syntax to make use of the dependency. So I'm going to have underscore. Let's give this a local name. So I'm going to say employee service, and this is going to be of type employee service. And of course we need to import this employee service. So I'm going to import employee service. Do I have it? Yep. From the current directory employee.service. So now I have a local variable that gives me an instance of this employee service. Now the code where we are going to fetch the data from the service is going to be in the ng on init lifecycle hook. Now I know we haven't talked about lifecycle hooks yet, but let's go ahead and add on init, and this employee list component is going to implement on init. And when we implement it, we need to define the ng on init method, and over here we're going to say this dot underscore employee. All right, I need to specify the access modifier, so private. So now let's give it a try. This dot employee service. All right, I have this employees over here, so I'm gonna say this dot employees is going to be equal to this dot employee service dot get employees. So we have a service called employee service, and we are referring to that employee service using this local variable. So this dot employee service has a method called get employees, and this is going to return an array of employees, and that array of employees we are going to assign it to the employees variable. So pretty simple, right? Let's save this. Now let's go back to our quick start application. Let's refresh this, and there you go. We still have the data, and if you notice, we don't have it hard-coded over here anymore. So let's go back to our employee detail component and let's do the same. So I'm going to just copy paste it because most of the things are going to remain the same. So let me copy this. Let's go back to detail and add it over here. And let me go back to, all right, I need to add on init. This is going to implement on init, and it's going to do the exact same thing over here. So let's go back to list component, and I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste it. Now we haven't included our employee detail anywhere, so let me copy this. Let's go back to our app component. Where is it? Over here. And underneath employee list, I'm going to add employee detail. All right, let's save this. Now when we refresh our quick start application, so we have our employee list and we have our employee details. Of course, they would be in their own views, and you would use routing so that you can navigate between employee list and employee details. But I just wanted to focus on services individually, and then we can talk about routing later on. So there you go. We have made use of service to provide the employee data both to the employee list component and to the employee details component. Now, let's take a moment to understand how we have benefited from using services. The very first thing is we don't have hard-coded employee data in each of the individual components. The second thing is that the single responsibility principle is not violated because we are using the components only for the view logic. So we're just using this for the view logic. The third one is that there is separation of concerns since the data fetch logic is separated into a service. So over here. The fourth one is we've actually got reusable code. So any app, any component that requires the employee data, we can go ahead and serve it. The fifth point is that we are able to mock the data for testing. Right now we are returning 4 employee data, the data for 4 employees. I can make it 10 employees. I can make it just an empty array, anything to mock the data for testing. The sixth benefit is that the data change is going to happen in just one place. So anytime you wish to change this data, you just have to change it in the service, not individually in each of the components that make use of the data. So that's pretty much the basics of services and how to implement a service using DI. Now let's talk about HTTP in the next video. But thank you guys for watching and don't forget to subscribe.